Hey guys, Google I/O is just around the corner, and you know what that means. More cool stuff coming to Google's Android operating system. What are we going to see? We don't know for sure, but here are some of our predictions. What are some things we might find at this year's Google I/O? Number one, hardware. Google loves to release new hardware at Google I/O. That's where we saw the Motorola Xoom. That's where we saw the Galaxy Nexus. So what are we going to see this time around? Probably not a phone, because we saw that last time with the Galaxy Nexus. But one thing we probably will see is Android 4.1, which is codenamed Jelly Bean. Some things that we know so far. One, it might not be 4.1. Probably will, but we won't know until they announce it. I'll get to that in a minute. Jelly Bean, we're pretty sure because earlier today they got a big Android filled with jelly beans out in front of, the Android building at the Google campus. So chances are it's going to be called Jelly Bean. Now, 4.1 versus 5.0. Well, Google kind of let that one slip as well, so you can buy the Google Nexus directly from the Google Play Store. And we did capture a screenshot that said that it's going to be the first device that gets Jelly Bean Android version 4.1. They quickly took that down, so of course they could change their minds. It might be 4.3, it might be 7.12, I don't know. But if I were a betting man, I'd say it's 4.1. And it's coming to the Galaxy Nexus as the first phone. So probably no new hardware. Tablets, however. Rumor has it Google is going to get directly involved into the tablet market. You see, to date we haven't had a Google Nexus tablet. What do I mean by that? Well, we've had Google Nexus phones, starting with the Nexus 1, which was a Google phone. It was built by HTC, and later iterations have been built by Samsung, but it was a Google phone, pure Google. With tablets, we haven't had that. We had the Motorola Xoom, but it was a Motorola tablet just running a pure stock version of Android Honeycomb, which since has been updated to Android Ice Cream Sandwich. But it still hasn't been a Google device. So what we suspect and what we're predicting is we will see a Google branded tablet. It will probably be called the Google Nexus tablet, or the Google Nexus 7, or the Nexus 7 tablet, or something like that. It will probably be a 7-inch device, and it will be able to go head-to-head against some of the ebook reader / hybrid tablet things. You know who you are, Nook and Kindle Fire. They're cheap. And they're not a real Android experience, but they're half the price of an Android tablet. Google is probably going to offer this tablet for somewhere around $199. Another prediction. But beyond hardware, what else are we going to get? Moving from hardware to software, let's start with the operating system. Jelly Bean, we predict, is going to have improvements to the way Android handles some of the hardware that we have in existing tablets and smartphones, particularly around multi-core processors, GPUs, and being able to more adequately handle additional amounts of RAM. All three of these components need to play nicely together. We suspect that Jelly Bean is going to help unify all these, take advantage of some of the higher end features and functionalities that we're seeing in the latest rounds of hardware. Next, since LTE is coming to most carriers around the world, the US has been a little bit slow to adopt, but we're getting there. We suspect that voice over LTE will become a native part of the operating system, so that the dialer will be able to handle that right there inside the dialer app itself, right inside Jelly Bean, without any need for additional third-party stuff to make it work. Speaking of graphics, there's probably going to be additional support for higher resolutions, specifically 1080p. We really haven't seen much of that in current versions of Android, and we suspect that may be a limitation of the current iteration of Ice Cream Sandwich. Jelly Bean, however, we suspect is going to be able to handle these larger resolutions and be able to do so much more gracefully than a lower version of Android would. We also think that this might tie in really well with Google TV, which is currently running up to Android Honeycomb 3.2 and is designed for a 10-foot experience on large, high-definition television screens. Can you imagine Google TV in full 1080p with really, really crisp graphics? We might also see some hardware announcements around that as well. Number 3 is apps. Now I know apps aren't specifically Jelly Bean related, but they are. Hear me out. So Google has this new 3D mapping technology. They kind of tried to beat Apple to the punch, kind of give them a bit of a jab back after Apple pulled support for Google Maps as the default map provider in iOS. So Google came out and said, well, we got this really cool 3D thing where we can make 3D maps and, buildings, trees, terrain, based on photography. We don't have to have modeling anymore to do that. Instead, just a whole bunch of computing power and a really smart algorithm. They showed that off. In fact, we showed that. You can check that back at Pocketnow.com. And it's really, really cool. But we haven't seen it in action on any one of our devices yet. The reason, I suspect, is it is going to be Jelly Bean specific. There are going to be some APIs and some extra stuff inside Jelly Bean that are required to make this new version of Maps work to get all the 3D glory. And let me tell you, if you haven't seen it, it is amazing. Just completely blows your mind. Can you imagine individually modeling not only every building, but every tree in a metropolitan area? You just can't do it. This, however, this can be done. So we're probably going to see Google Maps 3D released for devices running Jelly Bean, which at release time is probably going to be the tablet and maybe, if we're lucky, Galaxy Nexi that are running or upgraded to Jelly Bean very, very shortly. However, don't let that concern you. If the past is an indicator of the future, we'll likely see Google reverse engineer these new features to run on previous versions of Android, starting first with Ice Cream Sandwich and then moving slowly backward until they get the majority of everyone covered. So we suspect that Google Maps 3D will be a major component that's going to be brought forth with Android 4.1 Jelly Bean. Google Assistant or Google Assist, or who knows what they're going to call it. But Google needs to do something to combat Siri. Siri is ridiculously intuitive and helpful and bridges the gap from, well, user and computer to digital assistant, which is really the holy grail of where we want these devices to be. We haven't heard much, but we suspect Google's been doing something to improve the Google Voice Intents that we have right now and have had for some time in previous versions and current versions of Android. We suspect we might see something from Google that will help to bridge that gap and at least catch up with where Apple is with Siri. Lastly, polish. Operating systems look best when they're polished, when there are no rough edges. Things look right, they look consistent, and they're intuitive. They do what you want to do without you thinking about how they have to be done. Now, this is something that is a continuous process, so we're going to continue to see that refinement, that polish, in this and future versions of Android. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it is something that just makes the overall experience even better. So there you go, our 4 major predictions. 4 major areas of predictions, really. But what about yours? I know we've only got a few hours left before, so go ahead and go on the record with what you predict we're going to see at Google I/O, specifically what we're going to see in Android 4.1 Jelly Bean. Make sure you head over to Pocketnow.com and leave those comments over there. For Pocketnow, predicting the future, I'm Joe Levi.